All right, this discussion will actually play into our discussions in the future about Palestinian states and Gaza, genocide, and Muslim relations with the free world or the rest of the world, Muslim versus Christian relations, and Muslim Jew relations, stuff like that. And so we'll get to all those things, but in order to understand what we're talking about in those discussions, we need to get a couple things straight. And so this is to straighten out or give you context, perspective, in order to understand what we're going to be talking about with those future relationships videos and discussions. So we're talking about the idea of the civilization state, right? Civilization state is kind of the modern iteration of a concept that was developed first by a guy named Samuel Huntington in the 80s or 90s. I think it was 90s. 90s, right? Pretty much after the end of the Cold War, Samuel Huntington started with an article and then a book that followed up and expanded on the ideas of the article that talked about the clash of civilizations. He identified several different civilization types, 7 civilization types that were around the world. Everything from the Buddhist or the Confucian civilization type in Asia, China in particular. The West has its own Judeo-Christian based civilization type. There's a couple of others, and then, of course, the Muslim civilization type. This Muslim civilization type was, it's not represented by any one country. It's a civilization. So the civilization is something that crosses boundaries of one country into the next country or into another country. So we can find, for instance, the Muslim world well represented, circumnavigating the globe, going all the way around the world. We can find Indonesia, Malaysia, and we can find Saudi Arabia and places in between as well. So civilization suggests, in Samuel Huntington's thinking, that if there's any conflict in the future, it's going to be between civilization states. In other words, countries that are allied or associated with one another by civilization commonality against other civilization states from other civilization commonalities. They would clash with one another. Now, why clash? Because cultures, when they meet each other, they have conflict, right? Or they can meld together. We like to call the United States, for instance, a melting pot. It's not so much a melting pot. In the United States, we actually want cultures to assimilate, become part of the American culture. So what is the American culture? It's a unique blend of all the other cultures. It's not that any of the other cultures have priority over any of the others, but the American culture is kind of a blend of the best of all of these various different ones. They've assimilated. They've become part of the Borg of American culture. The best of. And if there was a existing culture that wanted to stand against American culture, then that would be necessarily, in fact, by definition, that'd be definitionally divisive. It'd be dividing the country. And so, of course, the best way to destroy something is to divide it and then pick it apart, right? Divide and conquer, one little bit at a time. Well, Francis Fukuyama responded to Samuel Huntington, and so he's part of the discussion of civilization states. We're not going to get so much into him, at least not in these videos. We'll talk about Fukuyama perhaps in the future, but not right now. Christopher Coker, who died last year, the year before, died just recently, from the London School of Economics, LSE, London School of Economics, took the ideas of Samuel Huntington and he brought them up into modern, more understandable terms. He talked about the civilization state, right? So the civilization state We associate not so much with Samuel Huntington. We associate with Samuel Huntington Clash of Civilizations. With the Civilization State, Christopher Coker. Coke as in Coke, Diet Coke, Coke Zero. Yeah, Coker. Christopher Coker, a man from the London School of Economics. He's dead now. His ideas will live on because he was right on target. It doesn't explain all of the conflicts in the world, but whenever you have a political theory or international relations theory, that theory will get you 80% of the way. Then 20% of the way, you have to make allowance for the nuances of that given situation, of a specific situation. So there is no theory that is absolutely explanatory for everything that's going on. So the globalists in international relations will be able to explain 80% of what's going on. The realists will be able to explain 80%. The neo-realists may be able to explain 80%. They would say 90%, but I'd say 80% of what's going on in the world. But each theory has its own limitations when it comes to that final 20%. And same with the civilization state thinking and theory of international relations. Before the civilization state thing has convinced me otherwise, tend to be a realist when it comes to international relations. And a realist is simply this. Imagine you're a child and you're in a city with a playground, and in that playground there are other children. The adults are not allowed to play, just the children. Well, if you think of international relations as a huge playground, the only children that are allowed to play in that playground are countries. Right? So countries are the children. Other children or other players are not allowed, just the countries. International relations says the only things that matters in the playground of the world are countries. Now that you understand that, you understand why the players, the children on this playground, will undertake certain actions. They'll do what they want in order to, take care of themselves. They take care of themselves first. So you can look at all of the actions in the world that have gone on. For instance, in World War II, why did Japan bomb Pearl Harbor? Or probably not because it wanted to take over the United States, but certainly because it wanted to throw the United States off guard. So the United States would not resist Japan's expansion and taking over of certain territories in the Pacific. Why would they want to have that freedom to take over lands unfettered? Well, because they needed resources for their own industrial complex. Japan is an island. It doesn't have a whole lot of natural resources available to it, but it makes lots of great stuff, right? Where does it get the material to make that stuff? Well, from other places. If it can get those things, that stuff, those resources from other lands that it now has control of, then it's going to be much better for its own industrial complex. So Japan made a decision to throw the United States off balance so it can go around taking over land and areas that would have the resources that they might need for their industrial complex. Understood in that way, you can understand that a realistic view would say that, of course, a country is going to do what it has to do to take care of its own best interests. It's not a matter of morality or good or evil. It's simply acting in its own best interest and feathering its own bed, making sure that it can continue to exist. Well, civilization state has limits. It doesn't explain all of the conflicts that go on in the world. For instance, a conflict between North Korea and South Korea is not necessarily explained by the clash of civilizations or civilization states in conflict with one another. It's an international conflict that is probably better understood through the prism of either globalism or realism. So what is neo-realism? Neo-realism just simply says that all the children that are playing on this world playground are not just countries, they're also international organizations like World Health Organization, United Nations, other types of non-governmental organizations. They would say that they have influence over the behavior of countries as well. I think neorealism is probably giving non-governmental organizations more credit than they're due. And NGOs are more tools to be used by governments to use in their realistic fashion to do what they want to do rather than what is best for the countries that they're around. So, Civilization and War, highly influential. Christopher Coker is a guy that wrote that. You could see a whole lot of YouTube videos involving Christopher Coker. He's very prolific. He's very persuasive, and he's good on this kind of stuff. Give him a listen. See what you can learn. I think it's probably a good explanation for what's going on. It's important to note that this is not an exhaustive list. I talk about Fukuyama and Samuel Huntington and Christopher Coker. There's more besides that get into that. For instance, one guy that I like, who is not necessarily world-renowned, but he's gaining priority in the United States, is a guy named Turley, Turley. And not Turley the lawyer. He may have a law degree, but Steve Turley, Dr. Steve Turley. You can find him also on YouTube, probably on Google as well, through Turley Talks. And he's worth pursuing as well. He has some very good observations on the rise of the civilization state. Understanding the civilization state helps you to understand stuff like ISIS, Islamic State, right? Islamic State is a civilizational entity, but it's not a national entity. Why is it given credit? Why is it supported by some countries? Why is it used? Not necessarily in a realistic fashion, as in international realism, but in a civilizational state fashion, because the countries can see the advancement of the civilizational concepts and fundamentals and values through such groups as ISIS. So, civilization state has some serious credibility when it comes to those things. All right, that's an introduction into this idea of the civilization state. We'll get into more detail and start narrowing in on some of the dynamics of what we're starting to see on our streets and in demonstrations in our next video. Talk to you soon.